and welcome back, students, for our next lesson in class definitions. Today we're talking about instance variables. So let's discuss those instance variables and also a little bit about methods. Recall our date first try class from the previous lesson. Each object of the class has three instance variables: date1.month, date1.day, and date1.year. Each is named by giving the object name followed by a dot and the name of the instance variable. If we replace date1 with date2, we obtain the three instance variables for the object date2. Now note that date1.month and date2.month, for example, are two different instance variables. All right, let's talk about assigning values. You may have already noticed in the labs, but the instance variables in our sample code behave pretty much just like any other variable. So for example, date1.month can be used just like any string. So you could theoretically say date1.month is equal to hello friend. Now, while this is legal and it would compile, it's not really in the spirit of the code because after all, date1.month is really looking for you to enter in a month, like January, February, March, April, that sort of thing. So it really wouldn't necessarily be what we want it to do. And later on, we'll get into exceptions and input mismatch, blah, blah, blah. But for now, we're just trying to really stick it to the spirit of the code here. Let's also talk about some methods. Our class currently only has one method, and that is write output. Public void write output, system.println, month plus day plus year. A pretty simple method. Now, all method definitions belong to a class, and all definitions are given inside of the definition of the class to which they belong, which in this case, that means that write output belongs to our date first try class. A method is then defined with two parts. You have the heading and a method body. The heading is the part of the code outside the curly brackets and contains information about how the method is constructed. So in our example, that is public void write output. The body is inside the curly brackets and contains the code that will perform the desired function. In our example here, that would be system.out.println month plus day plus year. All right, let's take that method now and break it down. We've already examined a bit what public means in the past. So let's actually just kind of move on to the next part of the heading, which was void. This means that the method performing an action as opposed to producing value. So when you put void there, that means I want you to do something. If you don't have void there, that means you're expecting to get something back from that method. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later in the chapter. All right, let's talk about now how to use methods. And we've already been using methods from predefined classes such as string. So string.length, string.equals. If we want to invoke methods from a class definition, we do it the same as if it were a predefined class. So to invoke our write output method, we can call the following: date1.writeOutput. This is equivalent to manually typing out the system.println statement inside the class. Now, why is that equivalent? So let's talk about that. Why is using write output the same as having a system.out.println? Well, in effect, they are the same thing. However, if you try to replace the write output with the system.out.println, then you're going to get a compiler error. And this is because our definition for output, the names of the instance variables are used without calling any object. So if we look at write output, it's just month, day, year. There's no date 1, there's no date 2, none of that is in there. So it has no reference to that object. Right? And this is because the method will be invoked with different calling objects at different times. So with our method, we can just do like date1.writeOutput, and it just does what we want to do. Or we can do date2.writeOutput. If I didn't do that, I would have to write system.out.println statements each time for date 1 and each time for date 2. Which is, of course, a little bit of a struggle because now you have code that's less efficient. So classes are really a more efficient and better way to kind of manage code here. Now, when an instance variable is used in a method definition, is understood to be the instance variables of the calling object. So date1.writeOutput is equivalent to system.println date1.month plus date1.day plus date1.year. So you can look at that. Look at how much more condensed that code is in terms of what I've written. Yes, I had to make a write output method that did month plus day plus year, but now I don't have, when I do that system.println, the next time I can just do, rather than putting out that whole system.println, each time for date 1, date 2, and let's say if I had date 3 and a date 4, I can just do date1.writeOutput. I'm done. Or date 2.writeOutput, and I'm done. So there is some advantages to using classes besides just, the fact that this is a different approach. It also is a little bit more efficient. Now let's briefly talk about file names and locations. Remember that a file must be named as the class it contains with an added .java at the end. All right, now because we're using Eclipse, this is kind of something that kind of happens automatically for us, so it's not really something that we really have to worry about. But just to kind of reiterate it, for example, a class named myClass must be in a file called myclass.java. So our biggest thing is going to be when you are starting to reference your own classes that you make sure that you are referencing the correct name and that that file is in the same project folder as your main class. Because if it's a different folder, Java's not going to see it unless you manually direct it, but we're not going to get into like trying to do file pathing and all that other stuff. Now we will eventually see other ways to arrange a file, but at this point, pretty much like I said, your program and all the classes you're using should be in the same directory or the same folder. And that's what you really want. You want everything to kind of be nestled into the same directory. So when you're in Eclipse and you're making the project folder and you go and you make a new class, make sure you're making your new class inside of that same folder. All right, we've reached our self-test questions, folks, so that concludes our notes. Until next time.